Well, the best of my recollection, it was at a meeting. We just loosely called it a Black Power meeting. Consisted of just people kind of just walking in off the street up on the U Street in Washington, D.C. back in the late 1960s, right after the riots of 1968. So I think it was just along about that time. And people were trying to figure out, just people in general who consider themselves active or at least interested in the race problem, just having some type of meeting, sort of informal, nothing very structured at all. And we just called it Stokely Carmichael at that time. That was the name he was called by. Had coined a phrase called Black Power. And so somebody said, we're going to have a Black Power meeting. And at that meeting, it would be discussed what is going on and why and what to do about the race problem and who should do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just the usual type of things that happen when black people don't know what to do, what they feel like they should, or think in terms of we should do something. So it was right here in U Street at a sort of little underground place. Wasn't that anybody was hiding anything like that. The place was just kind of located underground. That was the only space available. You walk down some steps and it was sort of like a basement arrangement under a row house type condition. People who are familiar with the architectural structure of Washington, D.C. and that area are familiar with that setting. So that's where we were. I don't even remember the address, actual address. But Dr. Welsing was there. I was there. I didn't know any of the people there. She didn't know me. And we were just kind of drifting around and talking and different people. I think there was a man who was in the news business called Charles Sumner Stone, sometimes called Chuck Stone. I think he was there. There was Marion Barry there. There were a number of people who later on became somewhat known, but they were sort of like unknowns at that time among most people. And so we were just, I myself was just standing around looking for somebody to talk to. And I was talking to a few people here and a few people there, just making idle conversation about the dilemma of race, et cetera, et cetera. And I started talking to Dr. Welsing. She was sitting and talking to someone else. I listened to them talk, two people sitting and just talking. I pulled up a chair. And so I was listening to their ideas and what they were saying, just sort of idle chatter, you might say, trying to piece things together. And I joined in. And that was just about it. That's how it all got started. And I started giving Dr. Welsing some of the views that I'd been carrying around for years, just accumulating papers and writing notes. That's how I finally wrote my book. I didn't intend to write a book. I was just writing notes about what to do about stuff that was happening on a day-to-day level. That's how I got started, as far back as the mid-1950s. I was trying to work out things for myself about, Fuller, what do you do when this happens? What do you do when a white person walks up to you and says such and such a thing? You have to do something. What are you going to do? What are you going to say? And so I figured out everything is about doing and saying. Of course, you're supposed to think before you say or do. So I included that in the scenario too. Hey, you think first, then you speak, then you act. And I learned that's something you learn basically in elementary school. Think first, then speak, then act. So I said, okay, so we got a race problem here. So, and each individual is involved in it throughout the entire planet, and that includes me. So, Fuller, what do you do? What is the best thing to do in any circumstance? And that's how I started writing my works. So when I met Dr. Welsing, I immediately started talking to her. I didn't know who she was, anything like that. She was a student at that time at Howard University, I believe. And so I just started talking to her because she was there. And she was just one of the people who was there. And she immediately called on and said, well, you talk kind of funny. And so we continued to kind of just talk. You know, people just sitting around making talk and throwing out ideas. And Dr. Welsing said that, well, seems like the things that you are saying are something kind of different from what I usually hear. And she said, yes, but you talk about this system of white supremacy as a system. And so she wanted to talk more about that. So then we couldn't talk that night, I mean, at great length. We did talk it somewhat, and then we just made an arrangement where we would meet some other time and talk. So we met over the telephone, and then she started having me come over to her apartment at that time on Fairmont Street, and she had other people there. And so sometimes we would start off at 7 o'clock in the evening and then start trying to brainstorm stuff going up to 3 o'clock in the morning. That's like on a Friday night, and go right into Saturday morning. We weren't aware of the time. We were just trying to kick things around. And so sometimes it'd just be 3 or 4 people, usually no more than that, no more than 4 people at a time at her apartment. And so that's how, that has been my interaction with Dr. Welsing. So later on, she said, Fuller, you're talking about what? I'm going to delve into why. I said, well, I don't have time to be bothered with why. To get into the fine details of white people's minds. I said, I'm only dealing with what they actually do.